In 1945, the Allied powers celebrated a victory for democracy. The global rhetoric promised a new world built on the preservation of universal human rights, a promise that, for many, was never intended to be kept. For Black citizens in the West, colonized populations in Africa, and women who had sustained wartime industries, peacetime meant a return to systemic exclusion. Women were pushed back into domestic subjugation, while racial segregation and colonial structures remained firmly in place. Civil rights leaders quickly found that traditional lobbying and legal petitions were moving too slowly to dismantle these systems. Institutional power was effectively ignoring the polite requests of the marginalized. This chart shows the two demographic shifts that would break that silence. First, the unprecedented spike in youth populations, known as the baby boom. Second, the steep, permanent rise of women entering the paid labor market. These trends did not just create a larger population, they created a critical mass of people with new cultural agency and economic independence. This generation saw the contradiction. Their parents mobilized to defeat authoritarianism abroad, yet returned to a society enforcing racism and patriarchy at home. This era did not lead to a lasting social peace. Instead, it produced two distinct vanguard identities, the youth and women, who would spend the next 3 decades building the tactical tools to dismantle the status quo. Disappointed by the pace of legal reform, young activists moved past the petition. They began utilizing direct action, tactics designed to physically disrupt the daily operations of an oppressive state. In the United States, students spearheaded the movement by occupying segregated spaces. At lunch counters across the South, their physical presence forced businesses to choose between integration or a total shutdown of their services. These tactics expanded with the Freedom Rides. By riding integrated buses into hostile territory, students used their bodies to force the federal government to intervene, exposing the systemic violence required to maintain segregation. On college campuses, this mobilization turned toward the military draft and the Vietnam War. Massive student strikes effectively closed universities and forced national debates on foreign policy. This global youth awakening resonated in South Africa, where it informed the rise of the Black consciousness movement, led by a young medical student named Steve Biko. Biko argued that before physical resistance could succeed, Black students had to undergo a psychological struggle. They had to reject the portrayal of Black people as inferior and build a sense of self-reliance. That intellectual shift resulted in the 1976 Soweto uprisings. When the government attempted to enforce Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools, tens of thousands of students turned their classrooms into nurseries for revolt. The youth vanguard proved that the most effective way to challenge an authority was to make its institutions, from schools to buses, impossible to operate. At the same time, the second vanguard was emerging. Working women globally began to realize that achieving racial or class liberation would be incomplete if patriarchal power remained untouched in the home and workplace. The women's liberation movement used consciousness-raising sessions to connect personal struggles to broader societal structures. They demanded more than just the vote. They wanted financial independence and an end to gender-based discrimination in every industry. In South Africa, Black women faced a specific double oppression, fighting both the racial segregation of the state and the patriarchal restrictions of their own society. The apartheid government utilized pass laws to control Black women's movement and labor, effectively fracturing families to maintain a reservoir of cheap, unorganized workers. In response, the Federation of South African Women, or FEDSAW, organized mass defiance. In 1956, 20,000 women of all races marched to the union buildings in Pretoria to hand over thousands of signed petitions against the pass laws. Their rallying cry became a permanent feature of the struggle: "You strike a woman, you strike a rock." This physical mass defiance by Black women was mirrored by a different tactical approach from liberal white women, who founded the Black Sash. They utilized silent vigils. By standing in public spaces with placards and black sashes, they used their racial status to protect themselves from immediate arrest, while publicly mourning the loss of constitutional rights. These activists show that women could weaponize their visibility and social roles to challenge the moral legitimacy of an oppressive government.
By the 1980s, the separate streams of resistance, the students, the women's groups, and the labor unions, began to reach the limits of what they could achieve in isolation. These movements began to merge. By pooling their distinct tactics and identities, they formed unified coalitions that could apply pressure across the entire social and economic landscape at once. In South Africa, this convergence resulted in the formation of the United Democratic Front, or UDF. The UDF used the boycotts, strikes, and marches developed over the previous 3 decades to make the apartheid system completely ungovernable, stripping the state of its ability to function. The history of this period suggests a consistent lesson. Structural change is rarely granted by authorities out of goodwill.
It is almost always the result of a disciplined civil society forcing the issue. The demographic awakenings of the mid-20th century standardized a new set of tools for civic engagement. They proved that institutionalized systems like Jim Crow or apartheid are vulnerable once the people they rely on refuse to cooperate with their oppression.